Thank you very much, and good afternoon. It's an honor to be here today and to address this conference. Allow me to particularly thank Ambassador Puri and Professor Sachi for inviting me and for making this timely and important conference happen. It is very special to be in Delhi again. It's a little emotional, a little overwhelming. The last time I was in Delhi was in 2014. Since then, you could say a lot has happened. I was arrested in 2015 in the Maldives. And after a trial of a few days, I was convicted for and sentenced to 13 years imprisonment. Of course, that wasn't the first time that I was jailed, nor the first time I was convicted for terrorism. I spent most of my 20s in one form or other of imprisonment. This time, fortunately, I was in jail for 11 months. For me, that is getting off lightly. I was jailed for the same reason that I'm always jailed, for standing up for democracy and human rights against oppressive regimes in the Maldives. And while the United Nations ruled that my trial was politically motivated and my detention illegal, it was the help and support of old friends that helped secure my release. Given that this is the first time I've been in India since my arrest, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the government of India, which played a key role alongside Sri Lanka, the United Kingdom, and the United States in securing my freedom. And I would also like to give special vote of thanks to the Indian Press Corps, as well as civil society groups and commentators who have kept a spotlight on the Maldives, have helped to expose the appalling human rights abuses being perpetrated by President Yamin's administration, and who helped build the political pressure that ultimately freed me from prison. To all those current and former government officials, journalists, think tanks, representatives, members of civil society, I say thank you from the very bottom of my heart. I do not come from a small island state. And Tonga, we do not come from small island states. I come from a big ocean state. We are 1,000 kilometers north to south in the navigable parts of the Indian Ocean. We are as big as, for instance, Saudi Arabia. The blue economy can deliver us to prosperity. The Maldives has been able to process its fish and sell it abroad, and we have receipts of $1 billion a year from our fisheries. We have a thriving tourism industry with receipts of $2 billion a year. We have opportunities of aquaculture, and we have many, many opportunities that we can drive from the ocean. But of course, we do have challenges. Dredging is, in my view, one of the biggest future challenges. Because we occupy such large territories in the ocean, what we have beneath the ocean is also, I'm sure, lucrative and profitable. There are dredgers now that pump sand 1,000 meters below the sea, and we have seen that in Spratly Islands. And these dredgers are coming our way. I've been asked to speak briefly on the challenges of South-South cooperation. I don't think you can pick a more important subject than this. The world is in flux. We are moving from a unipolar world to a multipolar world in which many big developing countries are rightfully emerging as regional superpowers and are having a far greater influence on international relations. For a small developing country such as the Maldives, this presents enormous opportunities. We are no longer solely dependent on the West for investments, trade, or political support. But it also presents major challenges and threats. I would like to touch on 3 examples how the rise of developing countries is changing the world from the perspective of a small developing country. 2 of these examples are extremely concerning and worrying. The other is very positive. I'll start with the bad news. My first example is the role being played by an emerging power which is exporting an extremely dangerous and radical interpretation of Islam across the world. This propagation of a very narrow version of Sunni Islam is extremely worrying. All over the Muslim world, radical Islam is in the ascendancy, and more tolerant interpretation of faith are under threat. Powerful Sunni countries pay for mosques, and they pay for their preachers to preach in them. They pay for NGOs. They pay for schools. All these investments have one thing in common. They relentlessly churn out a very narrow and a very radical, intolerant version of Islam. All over the developing world, this money is turbocharging radical Islam. And as reactionary Sunni powers grow, this process will likely continue. In the Maldives, as in many other countries, we have suffered from the violence and the chaos that accompanies radical Islam. The Maldives has the highest per capita of people fighting for the ISIS. And, of course, fortunately for Syria, the Levant, and the Middle East, the ISIS is being flushed out of the Middle East. And they are going to come back home. They are going to come back home with their friends, and in my view, this is going to be one of the biggest challenges for developing countries, especially for those in Muslim majority countries. In the Maldives, we have witnessed the spectacle of such a country trying to buy an entire atoll. Earlier this year, the Maldives were shocked to find out that the Yamin regime was secretly trying to sell off an entire atoll to a foreign power. People were more appalled to learn through leaks in the media that the Maldives government even changed our constitution in 2015 because that foreign country requested a change. It seems that that country wasn't happy about leasing an atoll for decades. They wanted to own it outright and forever. The Maldives has 26 atolls. And President Yamin was trying to sell one off to a foreign power. Well, when you sit back and think about it, this is extraordinary. Can you imagine a situation in which a foreign power secretly conspires with the government in India in order to buy, for example, Kerala? Of course, in a big country like India, which has a robust democracy, this is absolutely unthinkable. It would never happen. But in the Maldives, this is the reality that we face. Is it any wonder that some people label this form of neocolonialism? Since news of the atoll sale came to light, the popular uproar by Maldivians probably meant that these ambitions have been filed for a little while, but I'm sure not forever. But we need to be more mindful that colonialism is not just a Western phenomenon or a 20th century problem. The second example of challenges of South-South cooperation is in relation to emerging powers to our east. Such powers exert their rising influence very differently. It is primarily through major infrastructure projects underpinned by commercial loans, Exim Bank finance, and supplier credit. Over the past few years, we have watched the strategy play out in the Maldives as well as in our neighboring countries. I like to refer this to as a debt trap. A foreign government affords political leaders in a country such as the Maldives loans to pay for all manner of things, whether they are crucial infrastructure works or political vanity projects. Mostly they are political vanity projects. The result is always the same. The country where these projects are built becomes more and more indebted to the creditor country. Today, 75% of the Maldives' foreign debt is owed to just one country. Here are just a few, I'll tell you just a few of the projects they have wrecked up the debt. $800 million to upgrade Male International Airport. This was a project that our government were trying to do, or we had an agreement to do, and started work to do through a public-private partnership with no loan and no government money in it. But now, today, we have $800 million for that project. $210 million for a bridge between Male and the airport. $200 million for a resort complex in one of the atolls. Another $100 million for a powerhouse. And it goes on and on and on. All these projects were initiated by President Yamin, and all of them are vanity projects. And all of them came in the past 2.5 years. Even when President Yamin's regime collapses, as it will certainly do, how does an incoming government deal with such debts? Can we terminate them? Can we terminate the contracts? What would happen if we did terminate the contracts? This places future generations of Maldives in a bind. Straining under the weight of unaffordable debt repayments, might it be tempting for a future government to strike a new deal with its creditors? Perhaps the new port that was supposed to be purely commercial might also make room for creditor countries' military ships. Where does this stop? For the Maldives, the debt trap is a dangerous loss of sovereignty, independence, and our way of life. And for India, which has traditionally served as the Maldives' chief protector, this represents a long-term steady erosion of influence. There is a simple solution to this. terminate the contracts, terminate them all. But it's a solution that will never be pursued by the present regime in the Maldives, and it is also a solution that is of very high risk. On balance, not terminating these projects and continuing into the debt trap probably is far more risky than terminating them. Well, I'll come to the good news. The final example of South-South cooperation is far more positive: climate change. For low-lying countries like ours, climate change is an existential threat. Our islands are just 1.5 meters above the rising seas. I attended the 2009 Copenhagen Climate Change Conference as the president of the Maldives. At Copenhagen, there was so much mistrust among the countries. Part of the problem was that developing countries worried rich nations were trying to stop them from growing by imposing environmental restrictions upon them. But since then, so much has changed for the better. And this positive change has been largely driven by India and China. We now understand that carbon emission doesn't equal to development. There is a low carbon development strategy. It is possible to have the same economic outcomes through low carbon paths, low carbon strategies. We can grow our economies and cut carbon emission and pollution and improve public health. All at the same time, we could do that. Developing country manufacturing has led to the collapse in the price of solar power and wind power. And batteries are now rapidly falling in price too. India is pursuing a rapid rollout of solar energy while cancelling plans to build coal-powered power stations. Recently, in a bid for a power plant in India, the renewable bid was actually cheaper than the coal bid. Sri Lanka produces 1.1 megawatts of diesel-generated electricity at a cost of 30 cents a unit. The most expensive today of renewables in solar would be below 18, 16 cents. Sri Lanka will be, if they make the switch, saving $1.1 billion a year. India has announced that all cars sold from 2030 must be electric. In 2010, the Maldives announced a plan to make the Maldives carbon neutral. Not because we were contributing to the pollution, but we felt that there was an economic argument for this. Nobody thought at that time it was even remotely possible. But last year, 47 nations pledged to go carbon neutral in 20 years. And in large part because of India and China gave diplomatic leadership, the world signed the Paris Accord, which might, just might, save the Maldives. As the United States withdraw from leading on climate change, the developing world has an opportunity to take ownership of the issues and profit from it. South-South cooperation on climate change is one of the great economic, political, and diplomatic triumphs of the early 21st century. We should rejoice at this and keep working at it. Before I conclude, allow me to touch on a theme, in my view, ties up the three examples that I have given. And it is this. Nations only prosper when we get the governance sorted. Your monetary mechanisms, your aid monetary mechanisms are really how transparent, how democratic are countries. And when we get the people, and when we get the people involved in the process of governance, when we have democracy, when we have rule of law, in the absence of proper and transparent governance, we tend to make the wrong decisions. We build the wrong projects in the wrong place, done at the wrong price. This holds us back. Vanity infrastructure projects don't add value to a nation. Instead, they become a burden, a trap, and very often a debt trap. South to south, we must work at improving our democratic credentials. To conclude, as the developing world rises, the scope and the potential of South-South cooperation is great. This cooperation can drive growth, improve living standards like never before. It can help to resolve difficult global issues. But let us also be clear-eyed about the threats. With power comes the temptation to control and dominate. That is something of particular concern to small islands. For the Maldives, we welcome the rise of the South. And especially, we welcome the rise of India as a great power. But we also worry about our place in the world. We worry about the new threats to our sovereignty, our independence, and our way of life. And we worry about our traditional alliances. We want to see the Maldives remain under India's strategic orbit. India has always been the Maldives' historic protector. India and the Maldives have a shared history. Many of us learned our Hindi from Bollywood films. And for us, if we have to choose, we would like to enter into the middle of this century plugged into the rapid development of India and no one else. Thank you very much.